All right, let's get into our next interview now. A new mutation of the COVID-19 virus is circulating in South Africa. According to new research published this week, the C.1.2 lineage was first detected in Mpumalanga and Gauteng in May this year. The new C.1.2 variant has a considerable number of mutations and has the potential to become a variant of concern. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases says that while the Delta variant has driven the third wave of infections in the country, the C.1.2 could become the dominant variant of the fourth wave. To tell us more, we are now joined by NICD Associate Professor, Professor Penny Moore. Professor Moore, great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What more do we know about this particular variant?
What we do know is that it's been identified as part of routine genomic surveillance. The NGS SA consortium has a network of labs across South Africa and essentially monitor the pandemic very actively to make sure that we pick up new variants as they emerge. C.1.2 was picked up as part of that activity, but I want to make it very clear that it remains at a very low level in South Africa. As your viewers will be aware, the Delta variant continues to drive South Africa's epidemic at the moment, and C.1.2 is responsible for only about 2 to 3% of infections in South Africa at the moment.
I mean, how do we pick up these new variants? I suppose that's an important aspect that we, the laymen, need to understand. I mean, how do you find new variants that are coming through?
So the first author on the publication you're referring to, Kathy Skeppers, refers to it as spot the difference. Yeah. Essentially, you continue to look at the sequence of variants and you look for differences. You look for something that stands out. It's a string of amino acids, essentially, that determines the sequence of a variant. And when something starts to look different, and when you start to pick up more and more of those things that look different, a little cluster, essentially, in a family tree that suggests that something new has emerged that is distinct from the other variants that are in circulation, then that's something that we pick up on. We have a look at the sequence, we look at the specific mutations that distinguish it from the other variants, and we try to work out whether those mutations that make it different from the other variants are mutations that are in parts of the virus that might be functionally important, that might somehow give it an advantage, whether that's transmission or perhaps evasion of antibody responses, something that gives the variant an advantage. And if that starts increasing in numbers, then that's something that we flag as being potentially important.
Is it increasing in numbers? We say that it's still very low. I mean, it's just 2 to 3% of what we're looking at right now. Currently, Delta, the variant, is still the dominant one. But is it picking up? Is it stable? Is it dropping? Where are we at now?
It is slightly picking up. We picked it up first in May. It's now been detected in all of the provinces across South Africa, as well as in some other countries. And that is the reason that we are flagging it to the scientific community. As I said, it does have some mutations that make it slightly concerning. And it's that combination, the fact that we pick it up in all the provinces in South Africa, that it has been detected in other countries, and that it has these mutations. But it's a difficult balancing act. When do you flag something as being a variant that we should pay attention to? It's not yet a variant of concern, not even a variant of interest by the official nomenclature that is used. So it's a variant that we're watching because we think it has the potential to have slightly worrying characteristics, but at this stage, it's not yet a variant of concern.
If we look at, is it very much so the same kind of symptoms that one would have with the Delta or any other variant before that? Nothing has changed in terms of the actual virus itself.
Things have changed in terms of the actual virus itself, but nothing has changed in terms of our response to the epidemic in South Africa. And I think that's what people need to understand. All the data that we have so far suggests that the same methods that we're using to control the pandemic will work effectively for C.1.2 as they do for Delta. So the non-pharmaceutical interventions that we are currently encouraging, social distancing, washing of hands, wearing of masks, will work just as well against C.1.2 as they work against Delta. And all the evidence that we have, we're busy doing the laboratory experiments at the moment, but many of the mutations that define C.1.2 are mutations that we're familiar with. We kind of have a sense of what these mutations will give the virus in terms of a benefit for the virus. And so we are confident that the vaccines that we have in South Africa would continue to work should C.1.2 continue to increase in numbers.
The vaccine, everybody worrying about this now. Any indications, it's still early days, we know this, but any indications that this particular variant is going to duck and dive this vaccine that we're all sort of being told to have right now?
Yes, and we should go and have it, and it is the only way we're going to reduce the numbers of these variants that emerge. We are, as I say, we're doing the experiments at the moment. We hope to have data for you all in the next couple of weeks. But all that we know about SARS-CoV-2, including the mutations that define this variant, suggests to us that we have confidence that the vaccines in use in South Africa now will continue to work. And I really want to make the point that these variants will continue to emerge. They will continue to emerge and they will continue to cause trouble until we reduce the number of infections in South Africa and in the world. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is by increasing vaccine coverage. Yeah. So I really encourage everybody to go out and get those vaccines. This is how we're going to stop these variants from emerging.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one thing that people are, I suppose, debating right now, and perhaps you can talk to us about this, is that, you know, there's an understanding that obviously there are people out there that are very nervous to be vaccinated, and you know, that's why a lot of research and conversations such as what we're having are important, so that those people that are perhaps hesitant to have a vaccine can understand, you know, why it is important. And, you know, the talk around this, and a lot of people that are for vaccinations are pretty much so blaming people that are not vaccinating for the variants that are coming about. Is that fair? Does that actually happen? If you do not get vaccinated, is that one of the reasons for a variant that keeps on developing and coronavirus keeps on mutating? Whereas if everybody's vaccinated, the mutations will stop. Help us out there.
Yeah, you know, this is not a blame game. People are well within their rights to question and to want to understand vaccines. I think it's important to make the point that the vaccines that we have in South Africa have been extensively tested for safety. We are very confident that these are safe vaccines. But no vaccine is perfect. You know, none of the vaccines that we use in childhood immunization, for example, are perfect. What vaccines hope to do is to reduce the burden of disease in a country where they're being rolled out. You will get occasional breakthrough infections for all vaccines. As I say, they're not perfect. But what happens when you have a high enough level of vaccination in any particular country is that the rate of infection comes right down. Variants emerge from people who are infected. And so if you can reduce the number of infections in a country, you can reduce the burden of infection, then that essentially removes all the opportunities from the virus to mutate. Mutations happen randomly. Every time that virus infects somebody, it has a chance to acquire mutations that give it some sort of advantage. And so if globally, not just in South Africa, globally, if we can reduce the number of infections, then we reduce the odds for the virus to acquire new mutations and to spread. Mm-hmm. So it's vaccines, it's non-pharmaceutical interventions, it's being careful. It's what we need to do as a community is do everything we can to reduce the number of infections. Vaccines are a very powerful way to do that. They are safe, they are effective against Delta. We believe they will be effective against C.1.2. They are the most powerful tool that we have to reduce the number of infections. And it is only by reducing the number of infections that we will reduce the number of variants.
Yeah. Is there a possibility that this C.1.2 variant may actually die out before it becomes one of concern? Because you do read from certain scientists, and particularly here in South Africa, saying that it does share those common signs that the Delta variant did have. Do you think this one could die out, or do we really have to be cautious of this one?
We're watching it very carefully. I think, as I say again and again, you know, the one thing we've learned from SARS-CoV-2 is that we cannot predict anything. We're watching very carefully. We're sequencing across the country to try to monitor it, whether it grows in number or it decreases in number. At this stage, that's what we can do, is we can watch. But right now, we're dealing with a Delta pandemic. We have vaccines that are effective against Delta, and at the moment, Delta is responsible for more than 95% of infections in South Africa. And I think it's important to keep this in context. It's possible the variant C.1.2 will die out. It's possible it will increase in numbers. The only way we can tell that is by continuing to sequence, and this is what the consortium that does this in South Africa does so effectively. So we will watch it. We will test it in the laboratory. But in the meantime, we, as South Africans, continue to do what we've been doing.
Yeah. Just a final closing question as we head to our news headlines. You say that we do that so effectively in South Africa. A lot of people asking, these discoveries of variants in South Africa, what is it about South Africa? Is it the efficiency of our scientists that are so good that we're discovering these? Or what is it about these mutations and these ones that are quite aggressive?
We have a really fantastic system for monitoring variants as they emerge. We sequence deeply across the country. It's essentially a network that was built on many previous networks. For example, a network that screened for HIV drug resistance prior to the emergence of SARS-CoV-2. And as South Africans, we've really rapidly tailored what we have and what we were using for other pathogens and pivoted rapidly to address SARS-CoV-2. So we have the networks in place, we have the collaborations in place, we have the consortia in place to be able to do this very effectively.
All right, we leave it there. Professor Penny Moore, thanks very, very much for talking to us. NICD Associate Professor, this new variant that has been found here in South Africa, it's something that we're saying is not as yet something to be concerned about, but it is there, and a very, very close eye is being put onto this one.